if a rider stops and says, that was really good, or can I just debunk this exercise or try and figure it out? For me personally, I'm like, why not? Like, if this is going to make them better when I've left, that's important. Not just the fact that it looks amazing here and now, and then, by the way, I'm going to kiss you goodbye and good luck.
From performanceriders.com, this is the Parbery Podcast. I'm Nat Foxon, and each episode I challenge World Equestrian Games top 10 dressage rider Brett Parbery to explain and discuss what I call a Parberyism. That's a pearl of wisdom I've written down over the years of working together in our Performance Riders programs. Brett doesn't know what today's Parberyism is. Let's get into it. Okay, Brett, for today's Parberyism, I'm going to give you part of the sentence and you can finish it. Okay?
Yep.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Today's Parberyism is exercises are for people and
aids are for horses.
Yay!
Yeah. Wow.
Well, that would have been embarrassing if you didn't get that.
I was a bit nervous. Yeah.
So this is something that you say all the time. It's one of the top 5 classic Parberyisms. Exercises are for people, aids are for horses. Let's start at the beginning. What on earth do you mean?
Right. Well, we often write exercises. There's a lot of different exercises that people will have in their repertoire and coaches will have in their repertoire. And those exercises are generally probably the big thing that people take away from coaching and lessons. And because I'll often ask riders, who have you trained with recently? And they'll say, I went to such and such and they had some really good exercises, right? And it led me to think about back to when I was sort of starting to get my head around the sport and what's required in the sport and everything. And I was learning exercises like there was no tomorrow. And then I realized that the more I got to know about riding and dressage and training, the less I did exercises and the more I rode purely on the feeling of the horse and what was required at the time. And then that feeling then took me to an exercise. And I got to thinking about, why do exercises work? Why do people come away from the training sessions with, and basically what they can remember is the exercise and not necessarily, and they often remember, the horse felt better, the horse improved. And what I'll ask them is, well, why do you think it improved? What happened there that made the horse improve? To try and get them to think about the fact that all the exercise is a visual pattern that the instructor says, ride to this point and make this shape or do this turn or do something, and then ride it to this point and do it again or do something else. So basically it's just it's a pattern. And what that pattern does is it makes the rider, first of all, ride structure, and then secondly, put on the correct aids. And the horse doesn't benefit from the exercise. The horse benefits from the structure and the consistency and the fact that the rider then used the correct aids. So what I was trying to demonstrate to people there is, it's not the exercise that makes the horse go better. It's the aids and the structure that makes the horse go better. The exercise is for you, the rider, to give you a pattern, something you can see, something you can stick to, and that will make you more consistent and put on the right aids. So that's where I was going with that one.
What's an example you can give us of perhaps a typical sort of exercise somebody might ride, and how that translates to the basic aids that we could be using instead?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most obvious ones, when you get up to the higher levels with changes and half passes and pirouettes, that's when a lot of trainers will have 2 or 3 really favorite exercises. I always say with a bottle of wine and a blank sheet of paper, you can create 1,000 exercises. Like, it's about who's got the best imagination. But over the time, experienced coaches will have 2 or 3 really good exercises that they know will work. They know the riders engage in, and when the riders engage, the horse benefits. And they'll have these favorite ones, and I've heard of a lot, right? And I'm always open to listening and hearing more exercises. But as soon as I hear an exercise, I try and think of, well, what part of the horse did that affect, and what aids did the rider use to make it work. But look, with as far as an example, pirouettes are good. Like, there's every coach has got 2 or 3 pirouette exercises. Flying changes exercises. There's always an exercise with flying changes. When we talk pirouettes, that's canter and walk. Half passes, all of those things have varieties of exercises that can go with them to make them better and get the rider riding more of the horse and not just getting fixated on the half pass or the pirouette. But even at the lower levels, something just as simple as turning the horse can often be done on an exercise. So that would come back to the old square. When you see riders having to when you coach a rider to walk a square or a diamond, instead of riding a circle, where that sort of allows the horse's shoulders to fall out to the outside, where you get the rider to ride a diamond instead of a circle, to get more aware of the turning aids that are required at each 4 points of the diamond.
Right. So yeah, the rider is even by accident focusing on turning the shoulders around rather than, like you said, on the circle, sort of forgetting about those outside aids a little bit and potentially letting that shoulder fall out.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, that's a good one. Just to go back to the pirouettes, I think probably the pirouettes are the ones where the exercises come in most handy, because in the pirouette, there are a lot of moving parts when training, let's say a canter pirouette or even a walk pirouette. There are a lot of moving parts, and riders tend to focus on, we're only human, so we can only focus on so many things at once. So oftentimes when we're starting to focus on a lot of things, the first thing that goes out the window is the structure and the actual where the horse is in the arena. So what will happen is a rider will come in and start to ride, let's say, a working canter pirouette, and then they'll keep the shapes will change. So the working pirouette will get bigger, it'll get smaller, it'll go to the left, it'll go to the right. And what I always say there is, for that horse to make it smaller on its own, or make it bigger on its own, or go to the right or left on its own, it had to go through some of your aids. It had to either get behind you, it had to either push out from the heart, like get away from you a bit, or fall out through a shoulder or an outside set of aids, or anything like that. If the rider has lost the structure of the exercise, the horse has run through or has not responded to one of the aids. So part of the fact of saying, right, well, I'm going to make my pirouette, working pirouette, here between the quarter lines. So, for example, I'm cantering around and I go, right, I'm going on a straight line. I'm riding towards C in canter, and I'm now, when I get to the quarter line, I'm going to make a working pirouette that stays here between the 2 quarter lines. And that at least makes you put the exercise somewhere where you know you've got to stay. So if the horse makes it too big and goes outside the quarter line, you make the appropriate adjustment and put it back on the exercise. Or if it makes it too small, again, the same thing, and the same with falling out and taking the pirouette off to the left or the right. Those just the benefit of riding a structure into the exercise and then making sure that you stay on the pattern of the exercise will make you put the appropriate aids on and make you notice things. Notice that something's happened here. I'm not on the exercise anymore. So
that's a definite benefit for exercises, isn't it? That it, by nature, puts a little bit of structure into what you're doing, put some parameters there.
Yeah, and then when you're doing the test movement, and I'll use pirouettes again as the example, you do have to do them on a place. They don't say just ride in this vicinity and do a pirouette. It says do it between here and here or on this line. So you have to get used to that, and the quicker you can get used to it, if you can get yourself getting used to riding structure when you're training in a working sense, then it's much easier when you go to ride it in the test to ride the same structure, but then in the test shapes or in the test movements.
Yeah.
So it does come back to you in accuracy and judges' scores. The judges will notice when you are more definite with where you ride things.
So the Parberyism we're discussing today is exercises are for people, aids are for horses. If the rider doesn't have an understanding of the aids that exercise sort of made them put on the horse, so they come away from the exercise feeling like the exercise was the thing that got the job done, and then of course they can't translate that to any other context because they weren't aware of the aids.
And I was just thinking about what you're saying with exercises are for people and aids are for horses. It probably should be exercises are for people and correct aids are for horses, because the exercise invites you to put the correct aids on, and it's set up that the exercise is set up so you ride the correct aids. So this is where structure, when we talk about riding structure, this is just, there's no better example than exercises and the fact that they work to show us riders that structure is important, and not just to ride around on feel alone, but to actually ride with structure and feel. Knowing, and like you said, it's one thing to know the exercise, it's another thing to know what the exercise is for and what aids to use. Yeah. So when and what I'll often say to riders is, when they're having a lesson either with their coach or with a visiting clinician, if try to just ask a few more questions, and if an exercise really works, I'd be inclined to stop and maybe just go, you know what, can I just go through that, because that really felt good, and I just need to know why did that feel better. At the end of the day, I just think that equestrian or dressage coaching has got so far to go when it comes to modern world coaching, and the old riding lesson of just don't say anything, shut up, just keep going, and I'll tell you everything to do is just so freaking outdated. It's maybe once upon a time it was needed, or maybe it is today too. I don't know. But in saying that, I'd prefer to try to create a rider that is a thinking rider that understands they have knowledge and they know exactly why that exercise worked, and they're empowered by that. I don't necessarily need the ego boost on the day to make the horse look amazing, because I've had this, right? And I've had it from both ends. I've given lessons where on the day the horse looked really good and you're like, wow, I'm sure that rider would come away from that thinking that's the way to go forward with this. And I've also ridden in lessons where the horse has gone amazing. But, the true measure of whether a lesson is successful or not is whether that person can repeat it over and over again after the lesson on their own, at home, on their own. Right?
Yes, totally, 100%.
So that's the successful part of the lesson. So if a rider stops and says, that was really good, or can I just debunk this exercise or try and figure it out? For me personally, I'm like, why not? Like, if this is going to make them better when I've left and make them understand things and be able to be better to their horse and get their horses going better over time, then that's important. not just the fact that it looks amazing here and now, and then, by the way, I'm going to kiss you goodbye and good luck, because you know what I mean. So I guess that's what I'd like riders to think about when they're away. When they're doing coach clinics and things, to come away with the knowledge of why these things worked. Why did those aids work? What aids did I use? Why did that exercise involve those aids? And was I using the correct aids? And now how am I going to adjust that?
Just a quick message from us. If any of the ideas discussed today resonate with you and you'd love to dive deeper, head over to performanceriders.com. There's a bunch of free content for you, and there's loads of opportunities as well to work with us by enrolling in one of our training or mentoring programs. performanceriders.com. I really commonly hear from riders who come to work with you in our programs, can you please give me an exercise to solve XYZ problem? I'm having XYZ problem. I need an exercise to solve that, please. What do you like to say to those riders? Do you like to steer them in a different direction, or do maybe you like to prescribe an exercise?
Yeah, I think like my answer to that question would be, well, what's the issue? Like, what do you think the issue is? Why are you looking for this exercise? And then try to work out what part of the horse they're not quite connecting with or don't feel like their aids are working. And then go, well, here's 2 exercises that relate to the part of the horse that you're having the problem with. And could be putting the hindquarters in, could be putting the shoulders somewhere, could be having impulsion coming into something, or the half to correct collection. Like this, it's not rocket science. So there's only sort of half a dozen scenarios that are not working. It's actually a very simple sport. It's just very difficult to do. But so there's only a couple of things that could be going wrong. So what I'd try and find out is what the problem is. This is the part of the horse that's probably the most likely source of the problem. And then here's 2 exercises or an exercise that focuses on this thing. And to do this exercise properly, you need to use these aids, and it's these aids that your horse is responding to, not the exercise. The exercise for you. That's to draw the lines in the sand. That's to give you the imaginary shapes. That's to give you the structure to put the correct aids on.
It's almost like we need to freeze the video partway through that exercise in our mind and think, well, how did I shape my body? What aids did I put on the horse at that moment?
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny, like, in our program, the first module in Breakthrough is structure. And I often get quite a few people commenting saying, how can you ride structure and not, if I like to ride on feel. And I'm like, well, so do I. But I can tell you structure is important because, 1, the dressage test is the most structured thing you're ever going to do. That's one thing. And 2, if you don't think structure works, how come exercises work? How come we have all these exercises? The exercises that provide structure. And when a coach comes along and says, okay, I want you to do this shape, I want you to ride over to there, and I want you to ride a 10-meter half circle with quarters to the inside, then ride back on this line to C, or I'm just making this up, and then I want you to ride shoulder 4 on a half 10 around this circle, and I want you to do that 10 times. Well, that's giving you structure. So the rider switches off mentally and just concentrates on riding those specific aids. Yeah. And then after a little while, the rider goes, oh, wow, that felt great. Yeah. But the idea is to take that, what happened in that little pattern, take that into your normal riding.
One thing that popped into my mind as you were talking about the rider going through that exercise pattern is that something the rider's not thinking about at that point is they're not getting obsessed about what the feel is in their hands, for example.
Yeah, that's right. It takes away a lot of the chatter and a lot of the sort of things that pop into our mind going, oh, leaning on the reins, oh, I better do this and do this. And that randomness and those tangents that we all go on, it takes all that away. And when the rider does it a few times and they start to believe in the exercise, one of the reasons they're doing it when the coach tells them is because they believe, okay, well, I'm in a lesson and this could work. I'll believe in it. It's when they believe in it, then they'll keep doing it. And it's the keeping doing it. It's the consistency and doing it is what works in the end for the horse. The tangents and randomness just does not work for horses. You're better off to stick to something and see it through than to go 20% into it and feel it's wrong and go somewhere else, because the horse just won't know what's happening.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing there is that it's not the exercise itself. The exercise is not the magic bullet. It's what the exercise requires of us, of riders, to do, and then the consistency that works for the horse.
That's right, yeah.
Let's dig just a little bit for a couple minutes into the second part of the Parberyism, which is aids are for horses. Okay, we all know what aids are. Well, we think we do. Can you talk to us a little bit about how the horse responds to aids, what sort of aids the horses respond to, and how they sort of process that in their horse brains?
Yeah, well, the first thing horses require is that they don't like it when aids clash. So if we have aids that are clashing, or one aid that means 2 or 3 different things to them, they don't really quite get that. So horses like it the most when aids are specific to one response and one aid for one response. Not one aid could mean that the rider's looking for 2 or 3 responses, different responses. So they like it specific, clear, and consistent. That would be the main thing there. They also like it when there's a sequence or an escalation. So a light aid, something that gives them a signal or a whisper, and then something of course, if they don't notice it or they notice it and don't respond to it, the next aid must be then slightly firmer, because we are working with an animal that is being trained off pressure and release and uncomfort and comfort as the motivation. So that increasing the aid to something firmer is that whole pressure release, uncomfort, comfort response that we're looking for. So you're making it slightly more uncomfortable. And then again, if there's then no response, or the horse doesn't know it, or the horse doesn't want to respond, then there's the next aid, which is even more uncomfortable. So they like to have a clear understanding of those rules. If the rider just goes to the most strongest aid first, that's not a great thing for the horse, because the horses do have a sense of fairness. They do have this, I don't know if you call it a barometer, a fairness barometer or whatever, but they do think that this relationship should be a fair one, and they will get it if you have a sequence that is understandable. So a softer aid, no response; firmer aid, no response; firmest aid, response, or let's even say over response. Back to soft aid. The sequence goes again, and it's important that our riders understand that too, that the soft aid can be just the thought in some instances, or just the touch of the horse's skin, or touch on the contact, whatever it might be. But I want riders to really think about that sequence, because that can often be the difference between a rider who is riding with a lot of feel and looking like they're having, they've got this beautiful harmonious way of riding, versus a rider who looks like they're working super hard. It just comes down to that timing of aids and that sequence of aids, softer, firmer, firmest. And some riders have a much softer approach in a first sense, and some riders have a much firmer approach in the firm sense. So that's what I'd say to riders, is to think about that. So they're the aids. That's how a horse responds to your aids.
And all in aid, pardon the pun, of finding moments to do nothing, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's what the horse would like the most, is for us to sit there and not get in their way. Of course, it's impossible to do this sport by doing nothing. So it's then about having multiple little signals that the horse is noticing and responding to, because over time they've learnt how to respond correctly by having thousands of very small signals where the horse is responding to the littlest aid on the first moment, in the first instance, and that is what makes the rider look like they can sit there and do nothing and staying out of their horse's way. And that's what the horses want the most. They want to be able to do this, work within this relationship in the way that is the most comfortable for them.
Okay, there you have it. That's a wrap up of the Parberyism exercises. Of people, aids are for horses. Lots to think about in that one. Brett, it's time you go and get on that horse in the background that is ready to go.
I can hear him. Hear him out there. He's calling out someone.
We'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you, Nat. See you soon.